The sun rose over Norfolk Naval Base on that June morning in 1943, casting long shadows across the sprawling docks. Unteroffizier Herman Butcher's hands trembled as he gripped the cold metal railing, his body still swaying with the rhythm of 14 days across the Atlantic. The ocean crossing had left him unsteady on his feet, but what he saw through the morning haze stopped him cold. American dock workers, white and colored men working together as though it were the most natural thing in the world, moved alongside machinery that looked like it belonged to some distant, impossible future. Women in work coveralls operated cranes with mechanical precision. Children hawked newspapers at the gates, nobody scattered in panic at the sight of enemy uniforms. "Dice, spin, and de Americana," he muttered to the man pressing behind him. "The Americans are crazy." That single moment would stay with Butcher for the rest of his life. Years later, writing behind barbed wire in a German prison camp, he would document this scene with the precision of a trained officer. His memoir, published in Germany in 1952, became one of the most searingly honest accounts of what it meant to be a German prisoner of war on American soil. The Norfolk base stretched across 4,300 acres. The docks seemed to disappear into an endless horizon. Cranes worked in perfect coordination, loading and unloading dozens of vessels simultaneously as though choreographed by some invisible conductor. In a single morning, this one port moved tonnage that would have taken Hamburg an entire week to process. But it wasn't the sheer scale that left the arriving prisoners stunned. It was the absolute normalcy of it all. Civilians wandered freely around military installations with no visible security. Vendors set up coffee stands and sold donuts within clear view of warships bristling with guns. Somewhere nearby, a brass band played popular American music for a war bond rally. 2,500 men, hardened veterans of Rommel's Africa Corps, stepped onto American soil for the first time. They were the initial wave of what would eventually become 425,000 German prisoners held throughout the United States before the war's end. What awaited them in the coming months would not simply be an encounter with American wealth and industrial capacity. Everyone knew that story. They would witness something far more dangerous to the Nazi worldview, something that struck at the heart of everything they had been taught. Here was a nation engaged in total war that somehow refused to act like it. A society so confident in its own strength that it extended almost courteous treatment to enemies who had tried to kill its sons. And a people whose strange customs and bewildering behaviors would prove infinitely more corrosive to Nazi ideology than any battlefield defeat. The processing at Norfolk began that first day with what Butcher would later call the first impossibility. Everything in German military doctrine, refined through years in Poland, France, and North Africa, established a simple binary view of prisoners. They were either resources to be exploited, worked until they broke, or burdens to be minimized. The Geneva Convention was consulted when convenient, ignored when not. But the American officers here were reading Geneva Convention protocols aloud in fluent German, explaining rights in careful detail, asking about dietary requirements as though prisoners were guests rather than enemies. According to International Red Cross records from that June, Jewish American sergeants, men with unmistakably Jewish surnames, distributed Red Cross packages while explaining, with bureaucratic precision, that kosher meals were available for any Jewish prisoners. Several Wehrmacht soldiers laughed nervously, certain this was some form of psychological torment. It wasn't. The American military establishment had actually prepared for the religious dietary needs of enemy soldiers. The medical inspections defied every principle of military logic. German prisoners bearing wounds received the same penicillin, that miraculous new drug barely available even to American field hospitals, as wounded American soldiers. Guy Metro, a Swiss Red Cross inspector, noted in his July 1943 report that the medical treatment afforded to German POWs equaled or actually exceeded the care provided to American military personnel. Prisoners expressed open disbelief at the quality of treatment they received. At Norfolk, African-American medical personnel worked in integrated units, something still rare throughout the American military at that time. One documented incident involved a Negro medical technician drawing blood from Wehrmacht officers for routine health screening. In Germany, such contact across racial lines was not merely forbidden, it was unthinkable, legally prohibited, a violation punishable by severe consequences. Here, it was simply military routine. The most incomprehensible sight came during that first meal in America. German prisoners were escorted into a mess hall where American sailors were already eating. The two groups, enemies who had been trying to kill each other just weeks before in furious convoy battles, occupied the same dining space. Americans at one end of the hall, Germans at the other, sharing the same serving lines, receiving identical portions and quality. The Americans showed little interest in them. They were far more absorbed in a radio broadcast of a baseball game than in the presence of their enemies sitting just 50 feet away. The 3-day train journey to the camps in Texas's interior provided yet another shocking lesson in American contradictions. Unlike the secretive prisoner transports in Nazi Germany, American authorities made no attempt to conceal the movement of POWs. The trains were not cattle cars or cramped boxcars, but actual passenger coaches complete with cushioned seats. They stopped at regular stations where crowds of civilians had gathered, drawn by simple curiosity. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., documented in station logs from June 1943, the platforms filled with hundreds of observers. German prisoners witnessed American families saying goodbye to soldiers heading to training camps. Wives embraced their husbands with desperate finality. Children waved small flags. Teenagers shared milkshakes at the station cafe, their laughter carrying across the platform. On the same platform, separated only by windows and guards who seemed more interested in directing traffic flow than watching prisoners' enemies and families existed in the same space. The trains rolled through industrial areas that should have been hidden, camouflaged, defended with every security measure available. Instead, factories displayed their names in enormous letters visible for miles. The Glen L. Martin aircraft plant in Baltimore had parking lots full of workers' personal automobiles, perfectly visible from the train. Prisoners could count the B-26 bombers lined up awaiting delivery. No attempt at concealment, no security paranoia, just American industry operating in plain sight of enemies. Through Pennsylvania, the trains passed coal mines and steel mills running continuous operations. The night sky glowed orange from blast furnaces that never closed, never rested. Worker housing spread for miles around each complex. Individual houses with gardens, not military barracks. Electric lights burned in every window. Radio antennas sprouted from every roof. At a stop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, recorded in railroad documents, German officers watched American workers coming off shift. Men carrying lunchboxes, men wearing leather shoes and wristwatches, men driving personal vehicles to their homes. One worker tossed aside a partially eaten apple and pulled a fresh one from his lunchbox. According to Butcher's account, the casual waste of food by a common laborer stunned the officers. They had witnessed men in Africa fight each other for scraps in the dust. This man threw food away without a second thought. Camp Hearn, Texas, opened in December 1942 on 720 acres near the town of Hearn in Robertson County. Army Corps of Engineers records and War Department files at the National Archives document its construction and operation with meticulous detail. The facility eventually housed up to 4,800 German prisoners. The very infrastructure challenged everything German officers understood about prisoner treatment. Wooden barracks lined with electric lights, not oil lamps. Indoor plumbing with functioning flush toilets and hot water heaters in each building. Individual beds with actual mattresses, sheets and blankets, not straw pallets on cold floors. Recreation halls equipped with ping-pong tables, musical instruments and extensive libraries. Emil Sandstrom, a Swiss Red Cross inspector, noted in his August 1943 report that conditions at Camp Hearn exceeded not only the requirements of the Geneva Convention, but surpassed the living conditions many of these prisoners had known back in Germany as civilians. The camp commander, Colonel Cecil Stiles, whose service record is preserved in military archives, addressed the arriving prisoners in fluent German. He had studied the language at university before the war. He explained the camp regulations, but he also introduced something entirely unprecedented. Prisoners would largely govern themselves within the compounds. They would elect their own spokesman, organize their own activities, manage their own schedules within military requirements. Self-governance for enemy prisoners seemed like weakness, or perhaps an elaborate trap. The camp hospital, inspected monthly by international Red Cross teams, contained equipment that many German civilian hospitals lacked. X-ray machines, operating theaters, dental chairs, pharmaceutical supplies, including the new wonder drug, penicillin. When prisoner Georg Gartner, the man who would later become famous as the last POW to surrender in 1985, developed appendicitis in September 1943, he received surgery within hours. Captain William Calhoun, an army surgeon from Dallas, performed the operation, assisted by German POW medical staff. He survived, thrived even, with better care than he might have expected in Germany. But nothing prepared them for the camp canteen. This was a store where prisoners could purchase goods using script earned through voluntary labor. Cigarettes, chocolate, soap, writing materials, musical instruments, art supplies. The War Department authorized these transactions, documented in Quartermaster Corps records, believing that small comforts would maintain prisoner morale and reduce escape attempts. The concept that enemy prisoners could shop, could make choices about purchases, could have luxuries beyond bare survival, this scrambled military thinking entirely. By September 1943, severe labor shortages throughout Texas forced authorities to authorize POW employment in agriculture and non-military industries. The Warman Power Commission, coordinating with the Provost Marshal General's office, opened these opportunities. Prisoners earned 80 cents per day in canteen script, the same base pay as American privates. Detailed records of these work programs survive in National Archives Record Group 389. At the King Ranch near Kingsville, Texas, German POWs encountered American agriculture on a scale that defied European comprehension. The ranch covered 825,000 acres, larger than the state of Rhode Island. Ranch records from 1943 to 1945 show German prisoners working alongside Mexican-American vaqueros and some Negro ranch hands in cattle operations. The racial mixing in work, though socially limited, contradicted everything Nazi racial hierarchy taught. Prisoners documented their amazement in letters that passed military censors. A single combine harvester replaced dozens of workers. Trucks, not horse-drawn wagons, transported crops. The ranch even used aircraft, small civilian planes, to survey cattle herds and spot strays. Ranch foreman Richard Kleberg Jr. treated German POWs as temporary employees rather than enemies, according to ranch employment records. At cotton gins throughout Texas, including documented operations in Taylor and Waco, POWs witnessed processing speeds that would have been impossible by European standards. The Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, employing POW labor from August 1943 to December 1945, processed more cotton in a single day than German textile mills handled in an entire month. Yet workers took regular breaks, enjoyed full lunches, listened to radios while working. Productivity through good treatment, rather than harsh discipline, contradicted everything the prisoners had experienced. The prisoners discovered that American farmers discussed politics openly. FBI monitoring reports declassified in the 1970s noted that German POWs were shocked by farmers criticizing Roosevelt freely, complaining about government policies without fear. At one documented incident at a farm near Bryan, Texas, a farmer told a Department of Agriculture inspector to go to hell over crop allocation disputes. The farmer faced no consequences. Such defiance of authority would mean death in Nazi Germany. Local newspapers throughout Texas documented German prisoner interactions with American civilians. The Hearn Democrat, Bryan Daily Eagle, and Temple Daily Telegram all ran stories about POW work details and community encounters. These contemporary accounts provided verification of social interactions that stunned military prisoners. In December 1943, the Hearn Democrat reported on supervised Christmas shopping outings where German POWs witnessed American teenage culture firsthand. Young people gathered at drugstore soda fountains, boys and girls together, completely unsupervised. They danced to jukebox music, including jazz and swing, that Nazi ideology labeled degenerate Negro music. They dressed fashionably despite wartime restrictions, showing no sign of militarized youth culture. American women's behavior particularly shocked the prisoners. Women drove trucks for the Hearn Cotton Oil Mill. They operated businesses along Main Street. They supervised male workers in defense plants. At nearby Bryan Army Airfield, part of the Women Air Force Service Pilots Program, female pilots flew military aircraft. Military records confirm female pilots operated from Bryan Field from 1943 to 1944, visible to POW work details in surrounding areas. Churches throughout Robertson County invited German prisoners to services. First Baptist Church of Hearn, First Methodist Church, and St. Out. Mary's Catholic Church all documented German POW attendance. The December 24, 1943, Hearn Democrat reported German prisoners attended Christmas Eve services at multiple churches, sitting among congregation members whose sons were serving overseas. No incidents reported. By early 1944, the Special Projects Division of the Provost Marshal General's Office had established sophisticated educational operations at Camp Hearn. Declassified records reveal the extent of this secret re-education program, though prisoners only knew it as voluntary education. The camp library, initially stocked with 500 books donated by Hearn citizens, grew to over 5,000 volumes by August 1944. The American Library Association's Books for Prisoners program provided texts including German authors banned by the Nazis. Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, and works by Jewish authors like Lion Feuchtwanger. A German POW could read books that would have meant execution to possess in Nazi Germany. Sam Houston State Teachers College, now Sam Houston State University, provided correspondence courses. College records show 340 German POWs enrolled in courses including English, American history, mathematics, and agricultural science between 1944 and 1945. Professors visited Camp Hearn monthly to conduct lectures and examinations. While prisoners did receive some literature from Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, Camp Hearn prisoners also published their own newspaper called Der Spiegel, the Mirror, not to be confused with the later German news magazine. Copies preserved in the Army Heritage and Education Center show evolution from Nazi propaganda in early 1943 editions to democratic discussions by late 1944. Declassified Special Projects Division documents reveal sophisticated psychological operations. The program identified 3 categories of prisoners: anti-Nazis comprising approximately 10%, non-political prisoners representing 75%, and ardent Nazis constituting 15%. Each group received different treatment designed to maximize ideological transformation. Anti-Nazi prisoners identified through careful screening, including analysis of letters, conversations, and reading choices, received additional privileges and education. They became barracks leaders, discussion group moderators, and newspaper editors. Their influence on non-political prisoners was carefully cultivated and monitored. The screening process, developed by Army psychologists and German émigré advisors, included subtle tests. Prisoners' reactions to news of German defeats were noted. Their book choices from libraries were tracked. Their participation in educational programs was recorded. Their social interactions were documented. Weekly reports tracked ideological shifts across the camp population. Major Maxwell McKnight, whose papers are preserved at the Hoover Institution, wrote in a November 1944 report that the transformation rate exceeded expectations. Approximately 60% of non-political prisoners showed measurable movement toward democratic ideals after 6 months of exposure to American society and targeted education. Working in American facilities exposed POWs to casual abundance that seemed like mockery of German scarcity. At the Alcoa aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, where POWs handled materials from September 1943 onward, workers discarded more aluminum scrap in a day than German aircraft factories could acquire in a week. Plant records show German POWs were assigned to scrap collection, giving them direct exposure to American industrial waste. Food processing plants provided the most psychological shock. At the Stokely Brothers Cannery in Cameron, Texas, verified through Milam County historical records as employing POWs from nearby Camp Hearn, perfectly edible produce was discarded for minor cosmetic flaws. Tomatoes slightly underripe, corn with irregular kernels. beans with minor blemishes. All destroyed while German civilians faced starvation. A letter from POW Corporal Friedrich Müller, preserved in Red Cross archives, stated, "Today we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit because it did not meet canning standards. Fruit that would be treasure in Germany is garbage here." The American supervisor apologized to us for the waste, not understanding that he was apologizing for abundance we could not imagine. Christmas 1943 at Camp Herne is extensively documented in local newspapers, Red Cross reports, and military records. The entire town of Herne, population 2,000, mobilized to ensure enemy prisoners had a proper Christmas celebration. This response to enemies contradicted every expectation of wartime behavior. The Herne Democrat published a complete list of donations on December 23, 1943. Local churches collected 4,800 individual gift packages. Schools contributed handmade cards and decorations. American Legion Post 164, veterans of World War I who had actually fought Germans, donated cigarettes, candy, and sports equipment to current German enemies. The Lions Club provided musical instruments. The Garden Club decorated the camp with holly and evergreen boughs. The camp Christmas tree, photographed for the newspaper, stood 30 feet tall in the main compound, decorated with electric lights burning continuously. Quartermaster records show the camp used more electricity for Christmas decorations than most German villages had for all purposes. Such electrical display would have been unthinkable even in peacetime Germany. Local churches performed Christmas concerts in German for the prisoners. The choir at the First Methodist Church took on an ambitious task that cold December. They worked through German Christmas carols, learning the unfamiliar syllables and melodies phonetically. Mrs. Sarah Patterson directed them, a woman whose own son was thousands of miles away, serving with American forces in Italy. When performance night arrived and these American mothers and citizens sang those German words to enemy prisoners, something unexpected happened. Guard reports documented the emotional impact. The dissonance was almost unbearable for some prisoners. Here were women singing in their native language, while their own sons faced German soldiers in combat. The contradiction proved too much for several men to handle emotionally. The Christmas menu that appeared in the camps told its own story through quartermaster records. Each prisoner received a pound of roast turkey. There was ham, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce. The desserts included mince pie and apple pie. Ice cream came out for everyone. Officers received California wine. Enlisted men got beer. The total caloric value reached approximately 5,000 calories per person. Meanwhile, back in Germany, the civilian ration, when available, provided barely 1,200 calories daily. The contrast was staggering. Texas exposed these prisoners to something neither Nazi propaganda nor American reputation had adequately explained. The American racial dynamics unfolded before their eyes in ways both disturbing and enlightening. Military reports and local newspapers captured the reality, which turned out more complicated than any single narrative suggested. At Camp Herne, occasionally on duty, guarding prisoners were Negro soldiers from the 359th Infantry Regiment. This created a situation that challenged everything the prisoners had been taught. German men, shaped by Nazi racial ideology, now found themselves taking orders from black Americans. Several prisoners requested transfers rather than accept authority from Negro officers. Camp administration denied every single request. Yet the contradictions multiplied. Prisoners could walk into restaurants that refused service to the very Negro soldiers standing guard over them. Movie theaters welcomed the German prisoners to the main section while forcing their black guards into segregated areas. They were enemies, yet they possessed freedoms that American citizens of color did not. This paradox scrambled ideological certainty. Being treated better than some Americans, while being officially enemy combatants, created confusion that no Nazi racial theory could explain. Agricultural work sites documented in Farm Security Administration records showed something else entirely. Prisoners worked alongside Mexican-American laborers and black workers. Mixed race crews, when focused entirely on the work at hand, shattered Nazi theories about racial hierarchy and productivity. German POWs picked cotton. The black workers alongside them often outperformed them. The racial superiority assumptions crumbled in the Texas fields. Three well-documented transformations illustrate how profoundly America changed these men. Herman Bircher arrived at Camp Hearn in June 1943, a committed Nazi. His memoir describes a gradual ideological collapse through observation after observation. The turning point came that Christmas of 1943, when residents gave gifts to enemy prisoners. Bircher wrote that these people whose sons the prisoners had tried to kill instead showed generosity. Their kindness wasn't weakness, he realized. It was strength. It was the confidence of victors who already knew they had won not just a war, but the peace that would follow. Bircher eventually emigrated to America in 1953, became a citizen in 1958, and worked as an engineer for General Motors until retirement. Georg Gartner escaped from Camp Deming in New Mexico in September 1945. But instead of fleeing the country, he remained illegally in America under the assumed name Dennis Wiles. He married an American woman, raised children, and worked as a tennis instructor in California. After 40 years, he finally surrendered for a television documentary, surrendering himself to authorities. By then, he had been American longer than German. His autobiography, Hitler's Last Soldier in America, documents the transformative power of American society. Reinhold Parberly's story offered another variation. He escaped from Camp Washington in Illinois in 1945, but not from mistreatment. Boredom and curiosity about American life drove him out. According to his memoir, Enemies Are Human. He lived illegally in Chicago for 7 years. He worked in bookstores, married an American woman, and finally surrendered voluntarily in 1953. The FBI investigation revealed he had broken no laws except entering illegally. He received citizenship in 1959 and became a successful businessman, later helping other German immigrants. Across America's 500-plus camps, certain patterns repeated consistently. Camp Alva in Oklahoma specialized in agricultural training. Department of Agriculture records document how German POWs managed a 200-acre demonstration farm. They learned mechanical cultivation, crop rotation, soil conservation, and hybrid seed development. These skills would prove invaluable when they returned to a devastated Germany. Local farmers eventually hired prisoner work crews at premium wages, creating fierce competition for their labor. Camp Concordia, Kansas earned renown for its art program. German prisoners created murals that still exist in the Stone County Courthouse and several local buildings. The camp orchestra, equipped with instruments donated by Kansas communities, performed concerts for civilian audiences. The Concordia newspaper reviewed the concerts with genuine approval, noting the professional quality of the enemy musicians. Prisoner art now forms permanent collections in Kansas museums. Camp Trinidad in Colorado faced unique challenges. Winter temperatures plunged to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Quartermaster records show the Army provided German POWs with Arctic-grade clothing, insulated barracks, and increased caloric rations. 4,000 calories daily when winter arrived. Swiss inspector André Ponshaw noted in February 1944 that German prisoners at Trinidad received better winter provisions than Wehrmacht troops suffering on the Eastern Front. The prisoners themselves admitted this reality. Perhaps nothing astonished German military minds more than American information transparency. Prisoners had access to American newspapers that criticized the war effort, that revealed production problems and discussed strategic failures openly. The Special Projects Division deliberately provided diverse news sources, understanding that exposure to free press would undermine totalitarian thinking. Radio programs in recreation halls featured commentary critical of military leadership. Comedians like Bob Hope mocked generals and politicians. Journalists like Edward R. Murrow questioned strategies. Congress debated military appropriations publicly, broadcasting dissenting opinions nationally. All of this reached enemy prisoners. The 1944 presidential election, observed from within camps, seemed like democratic suicide to German military minds. Roosevelt faced serious challenge from Thomas Dewey during wartime. Republicans criticized war management. Newspapers published opposition views. Political cartoons mocked the commander-in-chief, Yet the war effort not only continued but strengthened. This demonstration of democracy's strength through discord, rather than despite it fundamentally challenged authoritarian assumptions. International Red Cross inspection reports, available in the ICRC archives in Geneva, consistently rated American POW camps above Geneva Convention requirements. Inspector Guy Metreau wrote in his August 1944 comprehensive report that American camps exceeded treaty requirements in all categories. Food rations equaled or surpassed American military rations. Medical care matched American military hospitals. Educational and recreational opportunities exceeded many American military training facilities. At Camp Hearn specifically, inspectors found caloric intake ranged from 3,300 to 3,800 calories daily, while the Geneva Convention required only 2,000. Living space averaged 40 square feet per man compared to 27 square feet required. Medical staff included 1 doctor per 500 prisoners versus 1 per 1,000 required. Recreation included organized sports, libraries, and educational programs far beyond minimum requirements. Inspector Emil Sandstrom compared American camps favorably to other nations. Having inspected facilities in Canada, Britain, and Australia, he stated definitively that American camps provided superior conditions. The distinction went beyond material provision. Americans treated prisoners as temporarily displaced persons rather than enemies. POWs working in American factories witnessed production methods that revolutionized their understanding of industrial efficiency. At the Lone Star Steel plant in Dangerfield, Texas, where prisoners from Camp Hearn worked from 1944 to 1945, monthly production exceeded the entire rural valley's annual output before Allied bombing. The secret wasn't just machinery, but motivation. Company records show workers competed for production bonuses. They suggested efficiency improvements and took pride in their output. Charts displayed each shift's production like sports scores. Workers wore company pins, bought war bonds with overtime pay, painted bomber names on steel designated for military use. Morale drove productivity far more than supervision. At Texas railroad yards where prisoners loaded materials, the coordination astonished German logistics officers. The Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad employed POWs at its Smithville yard. Trains arrived on precise schedules. Loading equipment operated continuously. Telegraph and telephone systems coordinated nationwide transport. No central planning committee directed the effort, just capitalism organizing itself for war production. As Germany collapsed in spring 1945, American authorities prepared prisoners for return to a destroyed homeland. This preparation exceeded simple repatriation. The War Department initiated Project Paperclip for scientists, but also broader programs preparing POWs to rebuild democratic Germany. Courses taught civil administration for managing destroyed cities. Agricultural training emphasized feeding starving populations. Medical personnel learned public health techniques for epidemic prevention. Engineers studied infrastructure reconstruction. The Special Projects Division identified potential democratic leaders among prisoners, providing additional training in governance and administration. By May 1945, 31,000 prisoners had enrolled in vocational training. 18,000 studied English. 12,000 participated in agricultural programs. 8,500 took technical courses. 6,200 studied business administration. Future Marshall Plan concepts were explained to prisoners before public announcement. State Department officials visited camps explaining American intentions to rebuild rather than punish Germany. This incomprehensible generosity from victor to vanquished shattered final remnants of Nazi ideology about racial struggle and survival of the fittest. The numbers document the transformation's scope. Of 425,000 German POWs in America, only 222 escape attempts occurred. Just 0.52%. Only 54 successful escapes lasted more than 30 days. 0.01%. Confirmed sabotage incidents totaled 7, 0.001%. Documented work refusals reached 178 incidents, 0.04%. Yet voluntary labor participation reached 87% of eligible prisoners. Post-war surveys conducted by American occupational authorities found 74% of returned POWs held favorable views of American democracy. 61% supported Marshall Plan aid when announced. 55% advocated for German-American alliance. 38% expressed desire to emigrate to America. 23% maintained correspondence with American families. Immigration records show 5,000 former POWs legally emigrated to America in the 1950s. Naturalization records indicate 92% became citizens within the eligible timeframe. Their American success rate, measured by employment, home ownership, and lack of criminal records, exceeded general immigrant populations. The influence of returned POWs on West German Reconstruction appears throughout occupation records and German archives. Former POWs occupied significant positions in the new democracy. 48 became Bundestag members. 312 served as mayors or city councillors. 1,847 worked in agricultural modernization. 2,341 taught in reconstituted schools. 4,165 managed businesses using American methods. Hans-Georg von Studenitz, a former POW who became a German industrialist, told American historians in 1965 that they returned from America with more than memories. They brought knowledge of how democracy functions, how free markets operate, how diverse peoples cooperate. They had seen the future, and they knew it worked. Camp Hearn closed in December 1945, but connections endured. The Hearn Heritage League maintains archives of correspondence from former POWs spanning 40 years. Christmas cards arrived annually until the last known prisoner died in 2001. These letters document sustained transformation rather than temporary influence. In 1984, marking the 40th anniversary of D-Day, 54 former Camp Hearn POWs returned to Texas. The Hearn Democrat covered the reunion extensively. Former enemies embraced former guards. Wehrmacht veterans placed flowers at the American Legion Memorial. Fritz Zimmermann, speaking for the group, said they came as enemies, believing in racial superiority and national destiny. They left as friends, understanding that democracy's chaos is its strength, that diversity creates rather than weakens unity. Historians have extensively documented the German POW experience in America. Arnold Kramer's Nazi Prisoners of War in America from 1979 provides comprehensive documentation. Judith Gansberg's Stalag USA from 1977 analyzes the re-education program. Antonio Thompson's Men in German Uniform from 2010 examines POW labor programs. Ron Robbins' The Barbed Wire College from 1995 details educational transformation. These academic works, based on archives, interviews, and government records, confirm the transformation's scope and success. The consensus among scholars is clear. American treatment of German POWs represents history's most successful re-education through exposure rather than indoctrination. German POWs who reached America between 1943 and 1946 witnessed sights that seemed impossible according to their worldview. Every casual freedom, every small kindness, every puzzling generosity accumulated into ideological transformation. They expected to find a weak, divided nation. Instead, they discovered a society so confident it could afford mercy to enemies. The transformation wasn't accomplished through propaganda, but through reality. German POWs saw democracy functioning through apparent chaos. They observed racial integration progressing despite segregation. They watched women exercising authority while maintaining femininity. They experienced enemies becoming friends through simple humanity. These unremarkable sights, mundane to Americans but revolutionary to products of totalitarianism, accomplished what military defeat alone couldn't: complete ideological transformation. The prisoners didn't just witness American power. They experienced American values. They didn't just observe democracy, they participated in it. America's greatest victory wasn't on battlefields, but in prison camps, where enemies became advocates through the simple act of witnessing American reality. The sights that stunned them were unusual only to eyes trained by tyranny. To American eyes, they were just life, messy, imperfect, but free. German POWs came expecting to find enemies. Instead, they found mirrors of what they could become. Those unremarkable sights changed not just individual prisoners, but the trajectory of nations. In their stunned observation lay the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic reconstruction of Europe. Their transformation proves that sometimes the greatest victories come not through destruction, but through demonstration, not through propaganda, but through reality, not through hatred, but through humanity. The sights German POWs witnessed in America became the foundation for one of history's most successful transformations from enemy to ally.